My name is Marcus, and for most of my life, I believed I was the master of winter. In the Adirondack Mountains, where I was raised, the cold isn't just a weather pattern, it's a religion. I knew how to read the snow, how to judge the wind's direction by the frost patterns on hemlock bark, and how to strike a spark in a blizzard. I was the man who ventured onto the ice when others retreated to their hearths. My arrogance was my sturdiest shield, and, as it turned out, my most lethal flaw. That Tuesday in late January, nature decided to strip that shield away. The temperature had plummeted to -22 degrees Celsius, and the air was so thick with frost it felt like breathing powdered glass. I was trekking toward a remote cabin on the northern shore of Lake Placid. It was a routine trip, but I decided to shave off time by cutting across the ice. I had seen snowmobile tracks earlier and assumed the shelf was impenetrable. I didn't know that a hidden current beneath the surface had been gnawing at the ice from below, thinning it to a fragile crust right where I chose to tread. The collapse. I was 300 yards from the shore. The world was a cathedral of absolute, sterile silence. Suddenly, the sound changed. It wasn't a gradual groan, it was an explosion. A sound like a steel cable snapping under 10 tons of tension. Crack! The world didn't just break, it vanished. Gravity inverted, and in a heartbeat, the solid world disintegrated. I fell instantly. When my body hit the water, it didn't feel like liquid. It felt like being struck by a million microscopic, white-hot needles. The water was a fraction of a degree above freezing, a physical aggressor that immediately forced my body into a survival reflex. My lungs seized in a spasm I couldn't control. I inhaled a slurry of ice and water, feeling the cold slide down my throat like molten lead. The battle in the dark. The first 30 seconds were pure, unadulterated chaos. My heavy winter boots, now reservoirs for the lake, became concrete blocks, dragging me toward the silt-covered floor 60 feet below. My soaked backpack was a predatory anchor. I lunged for the edge of the hole, but the ice was rotten, honeycombed, and weak. Every time I tried to hoist myself up, massive plates of ice crumbled like wet crackers, sending me back into the black. At one point, I was sucked entirely beneath the frozen sheet. The darkness there was absolute. I could see only a faint, flickering light above, the hole. My heart hammered against my teeth. "Not now, not like this," a voice screamed in my head. By some miracle, my fingers found a thicker ledge, and I breached the surface again, gasping for an air that felt too thin to sustain life. My fingers began to fail. I looked at my hands. They were a ghostly, translucent blue. But I didn't feel them as part of my body. They were broken tools. To shed my backpack, I had to use my teeth, biting into the frozen nylon and tasting salt and lake mud until the buckle finally snapped. I watched the pack spiral into the abyss, taking my flares, my dry clothes, and my hope with it. Threshold of consciousness. 10 minutes passed. Hypothermia began its final methodical assault. My blood retreated from my limbs to protect my heart and brain, a desperate tactical withdrawal. My consciousness began to splinter. I started to see things. My father standing on the shore, the warmth of a fireplace I could almost smell. I felt a surge of heat, the hunter's comfort, where the body, exhausted, dilates the vessels one last time. It felt wonderful. I wanted to close my eyes and surrender to the velvet blackness. In that moment, a sound pierced my delirium. A whistle, sharp, metallic, and demanding. I forced my head up. Against the dark pines of the shore, I saw sparks of color, neon yellow, red, blue. A group of hikers. They were far, but they had seen me. A tall man in a bright jacket began shouting commands. They didn't run blindly. They moved with the professional precision of those who respect the ice. The human chain, a dance of gravity. They lay flat on the ice, distributing their weight to avoid joining me in the grave. It was a terrifying dance. A woman at the head of the chain crawled toward the edge, pushing a rescue rope ahead of her. The ice beneath her groaned and shrieked, but she didn't flinch. "Marcus, grab the rope!" she screamed. Her voice was the only thread connecting me to the world of the living. The orange cord splashed inches from my face. I stared at it. My soul screamed at my arms to move, but the wiring was dead. I was a spectator in a tragedy starring myself. "He's not responding! He's fading!" a voice yelled from the back. The woman did something reckless. She slid to the very lip of the abyss, reaching out with a ski pole and hooking it into the collar of my jacket. "Pull!" she commanded. I felt the ice scrape my chest, and the agony of the freezing air hit my skin as I was hauled out. That pain was my first proof that I was still alive. The rescue was only the beginning of a different kind of torture. The rewarming process in the hospital was a symphony of agony. As my blood began to circulate back into my frozen extremities, it felt as though my veins were being injected with pressurized shards of glass. For 72 hours, I lived in a twilight of morphine and ice-induced neuropathy. The doctors worked in shifts, debriding the skin on my feet and monitoring the dark, necrotic tissue on my toes. Beyond the physical, a psychological frost had set in. For weeks after being discharged, I couldn't stand the sound of ice cubes clinking in a glass. The sound of a car driving over gravel would trigger a flash of that initial crack, sending my heart into a frantic, irregular rhythm. I suffered from cold shock dreams, where I would wake up gasping for air, convinced the ceiling of my bedroom was a sheet of black ice closing in over me. I had to learn to trust the earth again. My first walk back in the woods felt like treading on a minefield. Every snap of a twig made me flinch. But slowly, the gratitude began to outweigh the trauma. I realized that my survival wasn't a testament to my strength, but to the invisible web of human connection. I was alive because 6 strangers chose to risk their lives for a speck of black in a sea of white. Epilogue: The Inner Flame. 6 months have passed. The scars on my face have faded to thin, silvery lines, but the cold has never truly left. It is my constant companion. Even on the warmest July days, I feel a phantom chill in my marrow. My body has a new 0 point. I met my rescuers for dinner recently. They weren't mountain gods. They were teachers, nurses, and a retired mechanic. They didn't want medals. They just wanted to see me stand on my own 2 feet. Today, I returned to the shore of Lake Placid. I don't look at the ice with hatred, but with a profound, quiet respect. I know now that victory over nature is a lie told by the lucky. The only true victory is the one over your own desire to give up when the world turns blue and mute. Inside me, a small piece of birch bark is always burning, a flame that no wind in this world can ever extinguish. The Architecture of Survival, Part 2. For a long time after the hospital, I lived in a state of sensory mourning. My apartment in Lake Placid felt like a decompression chamber. I kept the thermostat at 80 degrees, yet I shivered under 3 wool blankets. The doctors told me that my hypothalamus, the body's thermostat, had been recalibrated by the trauma. I was a tropical plant trapped in a northern body. But the physical cold was nothing compared to the silence that settled in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I wasn't in my bedroom. I was back under that black shelf, looking up at the blurred, distorted light of the hole. I became obsessed with the physics of my failure. I spent hours reading about ice-out patterns and thermal currents. I was trying to intellectually conquer the thing that had almost swallowed me, as if knowing the water's density could somehow heal the hole in my spirit. The first snow. When the first snow of the next season fell in November, I had a panic attack in the grocery store parking lot. The sight of the white flakes landing on my windshield felt like a countdown. I retreated to my home, locked the doors, and stayed there for 3 days. My friends called, but I couldn't explain it to them. How do you tell someone that the sky falling feels like a burial? That was when Sarah, the woman in the yellow jacket who had led the human chain, reached out. She didn't ask how I was doing. She knew. Instead, she invited me to a small woodworking shop she owned. "The wood remembers the winter," she told me one afternoon as we sat among the scent of cedar and pine. "The rings of a tree are tightest during the years of the great frosts. The hardship makes the wood denser, stronger. You're just in a tight ring right now, Marcus." We spent the winter months building a small rowing boat. Working with my hands, despite the numbness in my fingertips, was the first real medicine. I learned that I could still create, even if I was broken. I learned that my hands could be warm if I kept them moving. The return to the lake. By February, exactly 1 year after the accident, I knew I had to go back. Not to cross the lake, but to stand on it. I needed to know if I was a prisoner of my fear or a guest of the wilderness. I drove to the trailhead at dawn. The air was a sharp, biting -15 degrees Celsius. I stood at the edge of the ice, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. My legs felt like lead. Every instinct I had, every cell in my body, screamed at me to turn around, to go back to the heater and the safety of the walls. But then I reached into my pocket and felt a small piece of birch bark Sarah had given me. It was dry, papery, and held the potential for fire. I took the first step. The ice didn't crack. I took the second. I walked until I was 50 yards out, then I sat down. I didn't try to go to the center. I just sat there in the middle of the white vastness and listened. I listened to the singing of the ice, the deep, whale-like moans of the lake expanding and contracting. For the first time, I didn't hear it as a threat. I heard it as a conversation. The lesson of the void. As the sun began to climb over the peaks, casting long blue shadows across the snow, I realized the core truth of my survival. Nature hadn't tried to kill me. The lake wasn't evil or cruel. It just was. My accident was a moment of friction between human frailty and the indifferent laws of physics. I looked at the scars on my hands, the thin white lines that looked like lightning bolts. They weren't souvenirs of a defeat. They were the marks of a second birth. I understood then that I would never fly, hike, or live the same way again. I would always carry 2 of everything: 2 fire starters, 2 satellite phones, 2 rucksacks. I would always be the man who checks the ice 3 times. But that caution wasn't fear. It was a form of prayer. It was my way of saying to the mountains, "I see you. I respect you. I am listening now." The final ascent. Years later, people ask me if I still hate the cold. I tell them no. How can you hate the thing that showed you who you really are? In the water, when everything was stripped away, my gear, my pride, my strength, all that was left was a raw, burning will to see the sun one more time. That will is the most honest thing I own. I've started leading small groups now, not as a conqueror, but as a guide for those who want to understand the winter. I teach them about the beauty of the frost, but I also teach them about the 0 point. I tell them that the only true victory isn't reaching the summit or crossing the lake. The true victory is the moment you decide to keep fighting when the world turns mute and the light starts to fade. As I rise into the mountains today, looking at the snowy peaks of the Rockies, I don't feel like a master. I feel like a guest who has been allowed to stay a little longer. And as I hold my hand out into the stream of icy air through the window of my life, I smile. I am not afraid of the cold anymore, for I know that inside me, a small piece of birch bark is always burning, a flame that no wind in the world, no matter how bitter or how dark, can ever extinguish. I have found the warmth that doesn't come from a heater or a sun. I have found the warmth that comes from simply refusing to go out. I am Marcus. I fell into the dark, but I climbed out into the light. And the light has never been brighter than it is right now, reflecting off the very ice that tried to claim me.